Hello and welcome to our weekly look inside Syria. I'm Hazem Sika. And with the Syrian conflict now in its third year, its implications have been increasingly felt across the region. And nowhere have those repercussions been as tangible as in Jordan. This week we focus on the kingdom that straddles Syria's southern border. More than 470,000 Syrian refugees have already crossed into Jordan. A number UN officials expect to pass the 1 million mark this year. And that's nearly a sixth of Jordan's total population. US Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel said Washington is deploying up to 200 troops to Jordan. He said the aim is to contain the violence on the Syrian border, with talk of possibly setting up a buffer zone across the area. Dozens of American troops have already been assisting Jordanians over the past year. The new deployment will include communications and intelligence specialists. Al Jazeera's Nasreen al-Shamaili has this report.
With the Syrian refugee crisis stretching Jordan's resources, the country has been under pressure to support the idea of setting up a buffer zone just across the border in Syria. The government says that a corridor in the Syrian province of Dar'a would help reduce the growing number of refugees pouring into Jordan. The area could provide shelter and protection for displaced Syrians and a base for the rebels. But some people say it could also be used to launch an international military intervention. Some analysts are convinced that if the buffer zone hadn't been an American idea, Jordanian officials wouldn't be talking about it.
It will be part of a wider plan to control Syria, especially after the collapse of the regime, because the US does not make such decisions based on humanitarian needs of the Syrians. It wants to make sure that an area that close to Israel is under control.
But many Jordanians do feel overwhelmed by the growing number of refugees who have crowded into camps and communities near the border. It's not unusual to see the war in Syria from across this border, but Jordan has resisted pressure to get involved in its neighbors' conflict for 2 years. Now it seems it's being dragged into it. A few hundred US soldiers are currently in Jordan. The government is concerned that fighters from Syria could enter the country. It's also been coordinating with the US on ways to deal with the possibility of Syrian chemical weapons being smuggled into Jordan. Because the possible repercussions of the war next door are so grave, the government appears to be trusting the US and going along with its plans. But many Jordanians aren't happy. Protesters say the presence of foreign soldiers is against Jordan's national interests and will push it towards a disastrous confrontation with Syria.
Preventing a spillover of Syria's conflict is not Jordan's only concern. Managing a camp of al-Zatri's size is a challenge for the security forces. There are over 140,000 Syrians living here and more are arriving every day. Repeated scuffles between the refugees and riot police indicate that the camp is becoming more difficult to handle. Nasreen al-Shamaili for Inside Syria, al-Zatri camp.
So to discuss the idea of creating buffer zones along the Syria-Jordan border and also whether or not Jordan is being put under pressure to play a more active role in the Syrian conflict, we're joined by our four guests. In Amman, Mahmoud Erdisat, a retired Major General pilot. Erdisat is also the head of the Amman-based Center for Strategic Studies at the King Abdullah II Defense Studies Academy. In Oklahoma, in the United States, Joshua Landis, director of the Center of Middle East Studies and associate professor at the University of Oklahoma. And also in Amman, Labib Kamhawi, writer and political analyst. And joining me here in the studio, Adnan Hayajneh, professor of political science at Qatar University. Welcome, all of you. Dr. Adnan, if I could start with you, to what extent is Jordan under pressure here with regards to the conflict in Syria?
I think there are internal threats and pressure as long as Jordan is concerned because of the refugee problem and because of the pressure. I think we are faced, in Jordan with what I would call it a social bomb. And I think because of the tension between the Jordanian and the refugees. And I think there's a lot of pressure over the government, which the government cannot cope with the demands, by the refugees. In terms of, regional pressures, there's a lot of actors involved in Syria, including, Iran, including Israel, and we heard about the attack over Syria today. And a lot of things at the international level, we have an American attitude toward Israel, toward Syria, which is, I think, is reluctant, and nothing has been, I think, done. And I think Jordan is left, I think it's alone to deal with all of this. And Jordan is the youngest brother among all of these, its family, Arab family, and cannot deal with all of this. Yes, the king went to the United States about a week ago and talked with the American administration, and there's some promises to help the Jordanian government, but I think it is only promises, and I think it's been under a lot of studies by the American administration, but nothing has been fulfilled to the Jordanian people, which I think Jordan is involved with, I think, a lot of internal problems. And the Syrian problem is adding to more. And if I can quote some of the senators, I think, in the United States, if the situation continue in Syria, will destabilize Jordan in the long term.
Mahmoud Erdisat, how do you see this? Would you like to see more outside help to Jordan in this crisis?
Yes, Jordan is becoming under very heavy burden from the influx of Syrian refugees in Jordan. Jordan is committed to receive those refugees because of their neighborhood and the other for international law, but the international community has to fulfill its obligations in helping Jordan, which is already suffers from economic hardships and so on. And these refugees, though they are welcomed by the Jordanian community, but Jordan is suffering economically, short of water, short of health and education for those refugees. All this is adding on top of the economic burden which we are suffering from. I think Jordan has been calling the international community and calling for other Arab countries to help out. The help is coming, but it is not to the standard which we can deliver the services, the full services to the refugees. And they are increasing by the day. The burden is increasing. It is not stopping to evaluate the situation and say, yes, we can plan to serve 500 million refugees. Things are going forward, and we might end up with 1 million refugees before the end of this year. And this is a very, very crucial situation for Jordan, which is already has its internal unrest as for unemployment and services. So that's all is adding on top of the problems we are already having.
Yeah, undoubtedly the refugee crisis is a major part of this equation, and we will talk more about that in just a moment. But I want to get Joshua Landis's view on this now. What do you see as the major choices facing Jordan here, and is this idea of a buffer zone along its border with Syria a viable one?
Well, I think to understand American foreign policy, you have to think of it in terms of Israel as well. Israel has always had a great influence over our Syria policy. And Israel wants a buffer zone along the Golan in order to keep any Islamists from shooting things into the Golan. And so any buffer zone that would be created, I think, would be created not only to protect Jordan, I suppose, but also to set up some kind of buffer zone along the Israeli Golan border to create a friendly environment for Israel. And this has dangers, of course, for Syria, and it has dangers for Jordan as well as benefits. Now, if you look at the way Israel looks at this conflict, of course, it's got dangers and it's got some positive things. And one problem or one aspect that's not been explored by the opposition is whether they want to make an alliance with Israel and come to some kind of understanding with Israel in order to bring down the Assad regime. Because Israel's attitude towards the Syrian conflict today is let them fight each other. We don't like Assad. We're frightened of the rebels because there's al-Nusra and other Islamists, and therefore this conflict is becoming stalemated. And the United States is very influenced by this point of view. And it has taken the idea that it just wants to make sure that the Syrian problem doesn't spill out into the neighborhood, that it remains in Syria. And that's a very danger, obviously, for the Syrians. One way to break that stalemate would be for the Syrian opposition to sit down with the Israelis and trade. They have a lot to trade. They can trade the Golan for Israeli help in bringing down Assad. Now, obviously, that sounds very crude, and it seems impossible today because most Syrians and most Muslims in the Middle East don't like Israel. But there is a precedent for this, because in 1970, in Black September, the Jordanian monarchy and Israel came to terms in order to keep the Palestinians at bay. The Palestinians and the PLO were trying to overthrow the monarchy in Jordan. And Syria came to their assistance and sent tanks. Assad sent tanks into Jordan. The Israeli Air Force chased those tanks out because King Hussein at the time made an alliance with Israel. And this is, in a sense, was the beginning of Jordanian, not the beginning, but it was a further Jordanian-Israeli dialogue. Something similar could happen between the Syrian opposition that would help with buffer zones and protect Israel.
Labib Kamhawi, where do you see Jordan's options here, and are they facing undue pressure from the United States?
Well, options are limited indeed, and Jordanians are severely divided over the issue of Syria. And you can fairly say they're split pro and against an intervention. Now, this situation led to absence of transparency on the part of the government. So it makes decisions without announcing them. And had the U.S. Department of Defense not mentioned anything about the 200 troops, for example, which is an elite force, the government wouldn't have mentioned the whole thing. So people are suspicious about the intentions of the government regarding the limit to which it's going to interfere in Syrian politics. People are worried that this is a messy situation that might eventually have its spillover into Jordan. And in that respect, people wish to know and wish to be assured that forcing Jordan's hand into allowing the passage of foreign troops and arms into southern Syria wouldn't eventually lead to involving Jordan in the war itself. And the absence of Syrian refugees inside Jordan, although it was an artificial thing at the beginning just to draw more sympathy from the world community towards the Syrian army, free army, it is now a fact, a hard fact that Jordan has to face. And the security loopholes in this respect are clear, and nobody can verify whether some sleeping cells are implanted within these refugees or not. But at the end of the day, it is so hot to handle that the Jordanian government has to work towards or inwards, seeking the support of the Jordanian people rather than succumbing to the pressure coming from the Gulf and the States and Europe into forcing Jordan into opening up for other forces to penetrate into Syrian territory.
Let's talk a little bit more about the refugee situation right now and give you an example of that. For many Syrians who've left the country, the situation is simply getting worse, as we've reported. People have rioted several times in the El Zatari refugee camp in Jordan over living conditions. The El Zatari camp was built to house around 60,000 refugees, but there are between 100 and 140,000 people there already. That makes it the fifth most populous place in Jordan right now. And if I could turn back to you then, Dr. Adnan, this is the more immediate worry for Jordan right now, the burden of caring for more than what are 500,000 Syrian refugees in the country right now, seeking sanctuary there since the start of this conflict 2 years ago. To what extent is that now shaping what Jordan does now from here on?
Well, I think it's affecting what the Jordanian government has to offer for the Jordanian people, and I think it's affecting healthcare, education.
It's a drain on the country's resources.
Yeah, I think, and you have to kind of be objective. And I think there's a lot of promises that I think, as some of your speakers and guests have talked about, but nothing is happening in the ground. Yes, it is not Jordan's fault. to be in neighbor with Syria. Yes, Jordan did very well with its own resources to receive all these refugees, but I think the international community has to step up and to help Jordan, the Jordanian government, in order to cope with these problems. Refugees are creating a social bomb, as I mentioned in the beginning of the interview with you, is most of them are living in the north governorates of Jordan, and there's a lot of tensions between Jordanians and between the refugees regarding jobs opportunities, regarding the increase of the cost of living for Jordanians, and a lot of tension even with the Egyptian workers within Jordan. And taken into consideration the internal arrest that's happening in Jordan, I think the security forces are overstretched, I think, in Jordan, and the continuation of the refugees and the internal problems with the government is not doing a lot, I think, to help the Jordanians themselves and the refugees. And I think we'll be facing a chaotic situation in Jordan. We are not sure. We are kind of faced with a very limited options. And sometimes maybe we have to deal with what is forced upon us, I think, in Jordan to deal with that issue. But I hope it will not be anything with an American intervention, which I would not consider any American intervention in Syria. I think they're having Syria left.
When you say American intervention, you're talking about military intervention?
I think military intervention. They're not even talking about a humanitarian intervention. And I think the Jordanian estimation regarding the future of Syria was communicated very well, I think, to the U.S. administration. It was published in the Washington Post. If the situation continues in Syria like this, we will have 3 states in the future. And this is also will threaten Jordan. The development in Jordan, because of the refugees, and the development in Syria and any other international intervention in Syria will also affect Jordan. It is a fact that Jordan is located within, I think, a problem within Syria, is neighboring Iraq and is neighboring Israel.
Let's talk more then about the military options for Jordan with regard to the United States. And I'll put that to you then, Mahmoud Erdisat. Is this a viable option, you think, both for Jordan and for the region as a whole?
To start with, Jordan is not a major player in this game, which is becoming a regional and international game in Syria. The outside players, on top of them, United States of America, is not in the mood to go into military action in Syria, as many accuse Jordan of being the base for that military intervention. President Obama said it loudly 2 days ago that he doesn't see any scenario where troops will be on the ground in Syria. Chuck Hagel, the Secretary of Defense, said me and President Obama wouldn't like to see, or is still not taking any decision in that regard for military intervention in Syria. Then the Americans are reluctant. They are not in the position right now to move. There are moves now, 100 troops, 200 troops, that for security and to watch out for chemical weapons, which Jordan is concerned about. We have a neighbor who has chemical weapons, and there are allegations that he used or somebody used chemical weapons in Syria. So we have to think about our internal and national security. Other than that, the international community led by United States is hesitant up to now for military intervention. Jordan has been, in general, against this military intervention because we think that such an intervention will not solve the problem, will further complicate it.
Let's put that point then to Joshua Landis then, this idea that as bad as things are getting for everyone involved here, the U.S. appetite for any type of larger military intervention is simply not there.
It's not. It's very unpopular. Latest polls show that 2/3 of Americans do not want to get involved in Syria. They feel that it would be a swamp. And it would be. Americans don't speak Arabic. They wouldn't know what they're doing in Syria any more than they did in Iraq. I think the most fruitful way for the Middle Eastern countries to move forward is to try to get Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, to get local Middle Eastern countries involved. They have a real long-term interest. They have a religious interest in getting the rebels to win. They're already giving money. They've organized the opposition. they are the ones who have the expertise. They speak Arabic. They have tons of advanced weaponry. They have American backing, and I think America and Obama has said that he would follow if they would lead. The problem is that they are just like America. They do not want to get sucked into Syria. They all see Syria as an intractable problem where Shiites are pitted against Sunnis. If they go in, it's going to open up sectarian problems in their own country. It's going to get a lot of their people killed. And it's very hard to see how a compromise can be brought between the various groups in Syria fighting today, because there are over 1,000 militias. How do you make 1,000 different commanders happy?
Labib Kamhawi, Americans don't know what they'd be doing in Syria any more than they did in Iraq. Your view?
Well, nonetheless, the outcome would be devastating. It's even worse that they don't know what they're doing and they still do it. So crying wolf wouldn't help at the end of the day. We have to recognize the fact that involvement in any way means involvement. And troops on the ground, although this is a concept that is debated now, it is an obsolete concept when you talk about superpowers. So the US doesn't have to send troops. They can do other devastating things, even more lethal than sending troops. And Jordan military involvement doesn't have to be by sending troops. It is enough to open up its borders to others, to send in paramilitary groups or arms to be militarily involved. In that respect, Jordan is not really forced into doing that in as much as it is playing the role it was designed to play since it was created, with the Palestinians, with the Iraqis, with the Lebanese, and now with the Syrians. And the issue of the refugees is something that Jordan does very well if there is somebody who would finance it. And the issue is really financial.
Let me disagree. I think Jordan was not created to receive refugees from Palestine, Dr. Labib, and from Iraq and from everywhere. Jordan was created as a nation state. And let me defend Jordan. Not here. I'm not defending the government because I'm critical of the government.
I'm not saying. Excuse me. I'm not saying it was created to do this.
That's what you said.
Since it was created, this is the thing that it has been doing very well, and it did it.
It has been doing very well. I think Jordan's been very generous for the Palestinians and for the Lebanese and for the Iraqis and for the Syrians and for everybody who's at the expense of the standard of living for Jordanian, at the expense for the Jordanian living, and we all also welcome everybody coming from even from Lebanon in 2006. And I think you have to be balanced. I think you have to be frank and objective. Jordanians, when you have the slogan of Jordanian first, I'm not sure we're saying that.
I am Jordanian.
We are all Jordanians if you live under the umbrella of Jordan. And I think if we take into consideration that the Iraqi refugees came to Jordan and 1/3 of them stayed in Jordan and they live in Jordan, and this is going to be a problem.
They still do.
The refugee problem will not be a temporary problem. That after the fall of Bashar al-Assad, they will go back. And I think under the estimates, 1/3 of them will stay in Jordan, and they will have
if you
more
want to
pressure.
talk, you can talk.
All right, I'll let Labib respond to this briefly, and then we've got to move on.
No, just a point of clarification, Dr. Labib. We're just making it clear.
No, it is clear. It is very clear. And the issue of the refugees, my belief is that it started as an artificial measure to draw world support. And then it became a problem. We have to recognize that this is how things develop. At one point, it was rumored that the Za'atari population is hitting 500,000. It is not. It is below 200,000. All of us know this. So there is a measure that was used to make use of the refugee issue, the humanitarian suffering of the Syrian refugees, to draw support, political support for other issues. Now, if this is behind us now, we have to look ahead and see how can we address all these issues without causing further harm to Jordan.
Yes.
Now Jordan is being forced to play certain roles that far exceed its capability and its means and its ability to sustain it for a long time.
All right.
So,
on that note,
Jordanians don't like this.
On that note, we are going to have to leave it. We're unfortunately out of time. We could certainly spend a lot more time discussing this, as has been made clear. Thank you to all of you in Amman, Mahmoud Erdisat and Labib Kamhawi, in Oklahoma, Joshua Landis, and here in the studio with me, Adnan Hayajneh. And thank you for joining us. Remember, Al Jazeera has extensive coverage of what's going on in Syria, not just on this program, but with our news programs and online at aljazeera.com. I'm Hazem Sika. Thanks for joining us.